Elon Musk stands alone by the vast ocean, the rhythmic crashing of waves accompanying his silent reflections. Despite his monumental success, a sense of emptiness pervades his being. What is the point of all his achievements if they fail to fill the deep void within? A question lingers in his mind. Is there more to life than mere scientific exploration and material success? In a moment of vulnerability, he whispers into the vastness of the universe, "God, are you there?" The silence that follows is profound, but something shifts. An internal presence, not external, begins to stir within him. It is a presence that speaks not with words, but with an undeniable sense of being, leaving Elon unsettled and questioning what he has just experienced. This moment of quiet introspection marks the beginning of a journey that will take him beyond logic, forcing him to confront a deeper spiritual truth. The whisper beyond the waves. Elon Musk stood alone by the ocean, the wind tugging at his jacket as waves crashed against the shore. The stars overhead twinkled like distant embers in the vast darkness, indifferent to the ambitions of men. He built rockets that pierced the heavens, sent machines to explore distant planets, and amassed a fortune few could comprehend. Yet here, beneath the infinite sky and before the endless sea, he felt hollow. An emptiness gnawed at the edges of his mind, a question he had long ignored but could no longer silence. His feet sank slightly into the damp sand as he exhaled, his breath visible in the cool night air. He had everything the world could offer, yet something was missing. The thought unsettled him. For all his technological advancements and triumphs, he had not yet conquered the weight pressing upon his soul. He watched the moonlight dance upon the rolling waves and whispered almost involuntarily, "God, are you there?" At first there was nothing but the sound of the ocean, the rhythmic crashing of water against rock, the distant cry of a lone gull, the steady pulse of the world, unchanged, unbothered by his inquiry. Then, a stillness. Not a silence of absence, but one of presence, as if the world itself had taken a breath, waiting. A presence stirred within him, not external, not visible, but real. It was not a voice, not words, yet it spoke. It was not fire, not thunder, yet it burned and shook him to his core. You search the stars for answers and build monuments to human will, but have you sought me? The thought did not come from him, and yet it was in him, through him. He felt exposed, as though standing before something far greater than himself, something that saw not only his brilliance, but also his frailties, his doubts, his fears. "I have sought knowledge," he murmured, unsure if he was thinking or speaking. "I have sought progress, the advancement of civilization. I have sought to make life better, to reach beyond our limits. And yet here you are, searching still?" The ocean continued its ceaseless motion, yet now it felt different. Each wave seemed to carry a message, each gust of wind a whisper of something beyond. He had spent his life exploring the universe, but he had never truly explored himself. A memory surfaced. His childhood, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what lay beyond the stars. Before the equations, before the calculations, before the race to build, there had been awe. A raw, unfiltered wonder. When had he lost it? "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely audible against the wind. "The one who has always been. The one you have always known, but never acknowledged." A wave crashed particularly close to his feet, sending a chill through his body. The presence did not demand, did not accuse, only invited him to see, to listen, to consider that beyond all human striving, beyond all understanding, there was something, someone, who had been waiting for him to ask. For the first time in years, he did not think of engines or algorithms or financial models. He thought only of the quiet yearning in his heart, the part of him that had been whispering all along but had been drowned out by the noise of ambition. The wind shifted, the stillness faded, but not completely. Something remained, a seed of understanding, of possibility. Elon turned from the ocean, his mind alight with questions, but his heart was no longer empty. And the waves continued their song, as they always had, as they always would. The unexplainable presence. The night was thick with silence, save for the occasional whisper of the wind against the trees. Nathan sat alone on the stone bench in the garden, his hands clasped together, his breath shallow. The stars above flickered like distant eyes, watching, waiting. He had come here seeking an answer, though he wasn't sure what the question was. And then it happened, a shift. Small, imperceptible at first, like a change in the weight of the air. The cool night seemed to warm slightly, not with heat but with presence. His heartbeat slowed, his chest rose and fell with a deliberate rhythm, as if his body itself was responding to something unseen. It was not fear. It was something far more perplexing. An awareness, a knowing. He didn't hear a voice, at least not how one hears another person speak. Instead, a whisper curled within him, threading itself through his mind like a quiet breeze through the branches of an ancient tree. "I am here. I have always been here." Nathan stiffened. His pulse quickened. He searched the garden, expecting to see someone standing behind him, but there was no one. Just the moonlit path, the rustling leaves, and the deep and abiding quiet of the night. His first instinct was doubt. He had prayed for years and longed for anything that would prove God was listening. But now that something had come, it was not what he had expected. It was not thunder from the heavens, not a pillar of fire. It was gentler, yet more overwhelming than anything he had known. A whisper that was louder than a shout. Was it real, he asked himself, or just my own thoughts playing tricks on me? Yet, the more he sat in that presence, the less it felt like his imagination. The whisper did not argue or reason with him. It did not demand anything. It simply was, and it had always been. His mind reeled. If this was real, then everything had changed, and if nothing had changed, why did he feel the ground beneath him was no longer the same earth he had walked upon just moments before? He took a breath, slower this time. His chest was not heavy, but full, like standing at the edge of an ocean, knowing that one step forward would take him into something vast, something that could consume him, yet somehow he would not be lost. The whisper came again, softer now, almost like the echo of something ancient, something woven into the very fabric of the world. "You have always been seen, you have always been known." Tears pricked at the edges of his eyes. How many years had he spent believing he was alone? How often had he searched for proof of God's existence, as though he were a distant figure behind a locked door? And yet here he was. Not in the wind or the trees, not in the stars or the quiet night, but in the very core of his being, in the space where words did not reach, but truth resided. Nathan did not move for a long time. He sat in the presence, in the unexplainable, and let it settle into him like rain soaking into dry earth. And though he could not explain it, he knew he would never be the same again. The quiet call of God. Elon sat in the dimly lit cafe, staring into the depths of his coffee as though it held the answer to his questions. Days had passed, and the weight of a recent experience still pressed upon him. He was a man of reason, a thinker who valued logic above all else, yet what had happened defied reason. It was an ordinary evening when it occurred. A moment of silence stretched long, and something or someone spoke in that silence, not in words, not in sound, but in a deep certainty that resonated in his soul. The presence was undeniable. It was not a fleeting thought, not a trick of the mind. It was real, and it left him shaken. For days he wrestled with it. He analyzed every possibility. Fatigue, an overactive imagination, some strange neurological response. But nothing explained the peace it had left in him, the quiet assurance that there was more beyond what he could see. His mind rejected what his heart knew to be true. Uncharacteristically, he reached out to his friend David, a man of deep faith. David was not the kind to force belief on anyone, which was precisely why Elon sought him out. If anyone could offer an honest answer, it was him. They met at the cafe, where they had often discussed philosophy, but this was different. Elon hesitated before speaking, as if the question itself would change something irreversibly. "Do you believe in God?" he finally asked. David smiled, not in amusement but in understanding. "Yes," he said simply. Elon exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "Have you ever felt, without a doubt, that he was there?" David leaned back in his chair, considering. "Many times, but never in the way I expected. He comes in stillness, in the quiet moments when we are finally willing to listen." Elon nodded slowly. That was what troubled him the most. Why me? Why now? His voice was almost a whisper. I've never searched for God. I wasn't even asking. David chuckled. Why not you? God reaches those who seek, even those who don't know they're seeking. Perhaps you have been searching all along. Elon frowned. But faith requires certainty, doesn't it? I'm not sure I can just believe. David shook his head. Faith isn't about certainty, it's about trust. You don't wait to understand the wind before you feel its breeze. You don't refuse to walk a path simply because you can't see the entire road. Elon stared at his friend, the words settling deep within him. So, what do I do now? You listen, David said, and when he speaks again, you answer. For the first time in days, Elon felt a strange peace. The battle between reason and faith was not one he had to win, it was one he had to surrender to. And in that surrender, perhaps he would find what he had unknowingly sought. The silent presence. The night was deep, and the sky stretched endlessly above him, speckled with stars like scattered embers from a celestial fire. He had always found comfort in the vastness of the cosmos, yet tonight it unsettled him. The universe was too grand, too intricate, to be the product of mere chance. Was there truly a mind behind it all? He had never been a man of faith. Religion to him had always been a relic of simpler times, a crutch for those afraid to face the void. But recently something had shifted. A whisper in his mind, a gnawing sense that he had spent years dismissing something vital. And so he found himself here, night after night, staring into the heavens as though they might answer him. The first time it happened, he had dismissed it as exhaustion. A presence, not physical, not even audible, but undeniable, had wrapped around him like a silent tide. It was neither forceful nor demanding, but it carried a weight, an authority that unsettled him. He had shaken it off, retreating to the safety of reason, yet deep down he knew reason had no explanation for his feelings. Now, standing on the edge of uncertainty, he wrestled with a newfound conviction. Was he truly alone? Or was there someone, waiting for him to acknowledge the truth? The cool air carried the scent of earth and dew. He wrapped his arms around himself, feeling the tension in his chest. The questions swirled, louder than before. If God was real, why had he remained silent all these years? If he had been watching, why allow suffering? Why allow doubt? And yet, even as the questions rose, so did something else. An awareness. It was as if he stood on the threshold of a door that had always been there, waiting to be opened. The presence returned, stronger this time. Not a voice, not a vision, but a certainty. It did not rebuke, it did not argue, it simply was. Then, without a word, the answer came. I am here, I am with you. He exhaled sharply, not because he had heard it, but because he knew it. The words settled into him, not as an assertion, but as a fact, ancient, unshaken, and immovable. He had spent years demanding evidence, but now, in this still moment, evidence seemed unnecessary. He had spent years searching, and yet, he had never truly been lost. Tears welled in his eyes, unbidden and unexpected. For the first time in his life, he felt whole. Not because of anything he had achieved, not because he had reasoned his way to certainty, but the weight he had carried, the burden of proving, controlling, and knowing, was no longer his to bear. The stars had not changed, the world had not changed, but he had. The silent presence remained, unyielding in its quiet affirmation, and for the first time he did not resist it, he simply let it be. And in that surrender, he found peace. A moment of clarity through compassion. Daniel walked home through the quiet streets as the sun dipped below the horizon. It had been a long day, filled with calculations, meetings, and the ceaseless hum of ambition. His mind, always occupied with grand ideas and innovations, was suddenly interrupted by an unexpected sight. A woman sitting alone on a worn-out bench. Her face was shadowed with exhaustion, her hands clutched a thin shawl against the biting wind. There was something in her posture, in the way her shoulders curled inward as if she carried an invisible weight, that stirred something deep within him. He hesitated. A familiar voice whispered in his mind, "You have work to do, places to be." But another voice, softer yet undeniable, countered, "You have been given everything for a purpose." Compelled, he stepped forward. "Are you all right?" His voice was gentler than he expected. The woman turned her weary eyes to him, searching his face as if trying to decide whether he was another passerby who would simply leave her to the night. "I'm just tired," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel nodded, lowering himself to sit beside her. He wasn't sure what to say, but something about her presence demanded his attention. Not out of pity, but out of recognition. He had spent years believing his purpose was in creation, in pushing the boundaries of what was possible, but then he wondered if he had overlooked something far greater. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small sandwich he had saved from lunch. "Here," he said, offering it to her. She hesitated before taking it, her hands trembling slightly. As she unwrapped it, her eyes filled with something Daniel had rarely seen before: gratitude. Not just for the food, but for being acknowledged. "Why are you helping me?" she asked after a moment, her voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Daniel exhaled. "Because I think we're meant to help each other. I don't know your story, but I know you matter." The woman looked down, as if absorbing his words. The city moved around them, indifferent to the quiet moment unfolding between two strangers. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt something shift within him. He had always believed his purpose lay in innovation, in making the world a better place through invention and intellect. But what if the real change, the most profound, lasting impact, came through small acts that often went unnoticed? He thought of Christ, who knelt to wash his disciples' feet, who fed the hungry not for recognition but because love required no reason. Had he been so consumed by his own ambitions that he had forgotten what true purpose looked like? The woman finished the sandwich and looked at him with tired yet softened eyes. "Thank you," she murmured. Daniel smiled. "Take care of yourself." As he stood and walked away, the weight in his chest was replaced by something new: clarity. Purpose was not a singular pursuit, confined to grand ideas and distant dreams. It was here, in the present, in the moments where one heart reached out to another. The world measured success by wealth, power, and achievement, but perhaps the kingdom of God measured it by compassion, by the willingness to see. The night air was crisp, but Daniel felt warm. He knew now that the path ahead was not just about what he could build, but about whom he could serve, and that, he realized, changed everything. The whisper of purpose. Elias had spent his life in pursuit of innovation. His name was known in circles of technology and business, yet he felt an emptiness that no achievement could fill. In the quiet morning hours, he would sit by his window, watching the world awaken, feeling as though something beyond his comprehension was calling him. At first he dismissed it, a fleeting thought, a mere distraction. But the whisper in his soul grew stronger. One morning, as the golden hues of dawn painted the sky, Elias found himself restless. He had always prided himself on his ability to solve problems, to create solutions that shaped industries. Yet now, his focus on achievements began to fade. What was it all for? His accolades, his innovations, did they truly matter? The whisper returned, gentle yet insistent. "You are here for a reason." Elias closed his eyes. He had always relied on logic, on evidence, on the tangible. But this was different. This was something unseen, something stirring deep within him. He thought of the prophets, the disciples, the men who had once been ordinary before they were called. Could it be that he too was being called? In the following days, his habits changed. He woke up earlier, no longer rushing into his routines of meetings and deadlines. Instead, he sat in silence, listening, not with his mind, but with his heart. It was difficult at first. The world had trained him to measure success by productivity, to drown out the still, small voice. But he persisted, and soon, he began to hear what he had been too busy to notice before. "Seek, and you shall find." The words surfaced from the depths of his memory, a passage from Scripture he had long overlooked. What was he meant to seek? Wealth had not satisfied him. Acclaim had not given him peace. Could it be that his purpose lay beyond the things he had spent his life chasing? One afternoon, while walking through the city, Elias saw a man sitting by the steps of a building, his clothes tattered, his eyes weary. Something within Elias stirred. Without hesitation, he approached the man, offering him food and conversation. They spoke of life, of struggles, of faith. For the first time in years, Elias felt truly present, not as a businessman or innovator, but as a fellow traveler on the road of existence. That night, as he sat in his study, Elias opened the Bible that had long gathered dust on his shelf. He turned to the Gospel of Matthew, and his eyes fell upon the words, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven." He understood now. His life had been about building, but he had been building in the wrong place. His purpose was not merely to create, but to serve, to give, to love. He had spent years asking what he could accomplish, but the real question was, what was he willing to surrender? The next morning he rose with a renewed spirit. He did not know exactly where this journey would lead, but he knew one thing for certain: he was no longer walking alone. The whisper that had once been faint was now clear. "You are here for a reason." And Elias was ready to listen for the first time in his life. The awakening of the heart. Elijah had always been a man of ambition. His mind was sharp, his hands skillful, and his will relentless. From an early age he sought greatness, not for the sake of others, but for the promise of power and success. He believed that to leave a mark on the world, one had to rise above it, not be weighed down by those who could not keep up. Yet something had begun to shift in him. It was not a single moment, nor a sudden revelation, but a quiet stirring within his soul. A restlessness that no achievement could silence. His wealth grew, his influence expanded, but deep inside, there was a hollow space he could not fill. One evening, as he walked through the city's bustling streets, Elijah saw a young boy sitting alone on the cold pavement, his hands clutching his empty stomach. The sight should not have been remarkable. Poverty was everywhere, and he had learned to look away. But tonight, for reasons he could not understand, he stopped. "Are you hungry?" he asked. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with surprise, then nodded hesitantly. Elijah reached into his pocket, expecting to hand him money, but instead he heard himself say, "Come with me. Let's find you something to eat." As they sat in a small diner, the boy ate eagerly, while Elijah watched in silence. For the first time in years, he was not thinking about business, profits, or deals. He was watching a child simply enjoy a meal. And in that moment, a warmth stirred in his chest, something unfamiliar, something deeper than the fleeting thrill of success. More encounters marked the days that followed. An elderly woman struggling to carry her groceries, a man sitting on a park bench, his eyes filled with sorrow, a mother weary and exhausted trying to calm her crying child. Elijah began to notice them, not as obstacles, strangers, or souls, and with each act of kindness he felt something change within him. He started to listen more, to speak with gentleness rather than authority. He no longer rushed past those in need, but paused, acknowledging their humanity. He found himself offering his time not as an investment, but as a gift. And to his surprise, it brought him a joy that his greatest victories never had. One evening, his closest friend confronted him. "You're different," he said. "You used to be so driven, so ruthless. Now you're, softer. What happened to you?" Elijah considered the question. "I thought success would satisfy me. I thought being powerful would make me whole. But I was wrong. I see now that true greatness is not in taking, but in giving. Not in being served, but in serving." His friend scoffed. "That's idealistic nonsense. The world doesn't work that way." Elijah smiled. "Perhaps not the world as we know it, but there is another way, a higher way, and I intend to follow it." In the weeks that followed, his transformation became undeniable. His colleagues noticed his patience, his family felt his kindness. Even those who had once feared him now saw him as someone they could trust. He was no longer a man obsessed with climbing higher. He was a man reaching outward, lifting others as he went. One evening, as he walked home, Elijah looked up at the sky. The same stars that had shone over him since childhood remained unchanged, but he was different. The hollow space within him was no longer empty. He had found what he had not known he was seeking: the light that shines beyond gold. The city square was filled with an expectant hush as the man stepped onto the platform. He was not a king nor a prophet in the traditional sense, but tonight he carried a message that would touch the hearts of thousands. For years he had pursued wealth, believing that success was measured in figures and possessions. He built an empire with his hands, yet his soul remained empty. The more he accumulated, the deeper the void became. Then, one evening, in the quiet of his vast but silent home, he encountered something greater than gold. God's voice, not in thunder or fire, but in the still, small whisper of truth. That night he fell to his knees, his heart breaking open like a vessel long cracked but unwilling to shatter. He realized that he had not been chasing wealth, but was running from purpose, and so he surrendered, not in defeat, but in the profound realization that true success was not measured in what he gained, but in what he gave. Now, as he stood before the gathered crowd, he spoke not as a businessman, but as a fellow traveler on the road of faith. My friends, we are all here for a reason. Our gifts, our talents, resources, and very lives are not just for ourselves. They are meant to serve, to heal, to bring light into the darkness of others. The words hung in the air like sacred echoes. People leaned in, drawn by the sincerity in his voice. He did not claim to be perfect, he did not claim to be wise, but his vulnerability was the very thing that made his message resonate. You see, he continued, we spend so much of our lives chasing things that cannot fill us. We build kingdoms that crumble, store up treasures that rust. But what if true success is not about how much we own, but how much we give? What if love, not ambition, is the greatest currency? A woman in the crowd wiped away tears. A young man bowed his head, weary from years of searching for meaning in temporary pleasures. The words were not just words. They were an invitation. And then, in the quiet, he spoke the truth that had changed his life. There is a deeper meaning to success, my friends. It is not about power, but about purpose. It is not about status, but about service. The one who made us did not place us here to hoard and conquer, but to love and uplift. I once thought my legacy would be written in numbers and contracts, but now I see our true legacy is love. The square remained silent for a moment longer before applause broke out, not the hollow applause of entertainment, but the raw, unguarded response of souls moved by something far greater than themselves. A young child reached for his hand as he stepped down from the stage. "Mister," the boy said, eyes bright with wonder, "does that mean we can all change the world?" The man knelt to meet the child's gaze. "Yes," he said with a smile, "but only if we let love lead the way." And with that, the journey truly began. The path of divine purpose, a journey of revelation. In the quiet moments of reflection, a man stood alone as the sun set beyond the horizon and the stars began their ancient dance across the heavens. His heart was heavy with the weight of a profound realization, one that had gradually unfolded in the deepest chambers of his soul. For years he had lived in the world of technology, a place where logic and precision reigned supreme. But now, as he gazed upon the vastness of the sky, his purpose became undeniably clear. His mission extended far beyond the realm of machines and systems. It was, in truth, a mission of the spirit. He had always believed that he was meant for something greater, but the path was murky, and the world's distractions had clouded his vision. Yet in this moment, something stirred within him. He understood now that his life was not just a series of random events, nor was it merely the result of a complex algorithm. No, his life was a testament to a greater force, a higher power guiding him all along. It was the hand of God, subtly weaving a tapestry of divine purpose through every experience, every challenge, and every victory. As the realization settled in his heart, he stood at a crossroads. His journey was not one of fame or fortune, but of truth. He had been given the privilege and the responsibility to share this truth with others. "We are not alone," he whispered to the empty sky, his voice filled with both awe and conviction. "There is a greater force guiding us." The words lingered in the air, as though the very wind carried them to the farthest corners of the earth. He felt an undeniable urgency to share this message with a world desperately needed it. people wandered in confusion, searching for meaning in the chaos of life, unaware that they were never truly alone. There was a purpose to their existence, a plan that transcended their individual struggles. They simply needed to see it. But the task before him was not an easy one. To speak of such things required courage. It demanded that he put aside his doubts and embrace the vulnerability of sharing something so deeply personal and sacred. He knew that many would not understand, that some would mock or dismiss his message. Yet in his heart he felt an unshakable resolve. He could no longer stay silent. This truth was too precious, too transformative to keep to himself. He began to plan how he would reach others, how he would share the revelation that had so profoundly altered his own life. He did not have all the answers, but he knew that he had a piece of the puzzle, a glimpse of the divine that others needed to see. His words would not be perfect, his efforts may not be flawless, but they would be enough, for in the act of sharing, he found his own strength and purpose. As he walked this new path, he could feel the presence of God walking beside him, a quiet, steady companion. And though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew he was not alone. There was a purpose behind every step, every moment. His journey had only just begun, but he was no longer the same man who had once been lost in the maze of technology and ambition. In the distance, a light began to shine, a beacon of hope in the darkness. It was the light of truth, the light of God's eternal love, and he knew that it was his calling to share it with the world. He had found his purpose, and it was clear: to inspire others to recognize the greater force that was guiding them, just as it had guided him. As the night deepened, he stood with renewed resolve. The journey was long, and the questions remained, but the answers would come in time. For now, he was content knowing that he was no longer walking alone. And in that certainty, he found peace. As Elon Musk stands at the edge of the vast ocean, he realizes that his achievements, his inventions, and the material success he once pursued have not brought him the fulfillment he once sought. In that profound silence, he finds a presence within himself, not an external force, but a deep internal whisper that offers him comfort and peace. His journey from skepticism to faith is not one of certainty, but one of profound transformation. In embracing his purpose, he discovers that the true measure of success lies not in technological advancement, but in the quiet acts of compassion and the shared humanity that connects us all. As he walks this newfound path, his message to the world is simple: our gifts are not for our own gain, but to uplift others. And in this he finds the peace and purpose that eluded him before, knowing that he is never truly alone.